When crime boss Damon Kessler walks into his mansion at 2 in the morning and sees the pregnant maid scrubbing floors like her life depends on it, he doesn't expect to recognize the bruises circling her wrists, or the scar above her eyebrow that takes him straight back to a childhood he spent 20 years trying to forget. The terrified girl hiding behind that mop bucket once saved his life. Now she's running from something worse than poverty, and the baby she's carrying might not survive whatever she's running from. Some debts can't be paid with money. Some promises never expire. If you're ready to see how far loyalty can reach when the past comes back asking for protection, stay with me until the end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The marble floors of the Kessler estate gleamed even at 2 in the morning, reflecting the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen stars throughout the hallway. Damon Kessler's Italian leather shoes made no sound as he walked through his domain, the silence of wealth surrounding him like a second skin. He'd just returned from a meeting that had required his particular brand of persuasion, the kind that left no witnesses and fewer questions, and all he wanted was a glass of scotch and the oblivion of sleep. Instead, he found her. She was on her hands and knees in the east corridor, scrubbing at a stain that probably didn't exist, her movements frantic despite the obvious exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. The staff had been dismissed hours ago. No one should have been working at this hour, especially not someone who looked ready to collapse from the effort of simply breathing. Damon stopped walking. The woman didn't notice him at first. She was too focused on her task, attacking the floor with a desperation that had nothing to do with cleanliness and everything to do with fear. Her uniform hung loose over a body that had clearly known better days, but it couldn't hide the pronounced curve of her belly. 7 months pregnant, maybe 8. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, the kind of thinness that came from missing too many meals. He should have kept walking. His estate employed dozens of people, and he made it a point not to learn their names or their stories. Emotional distance was a survival skill in his world, and he'd mastered it years ago. But then her sleeve slipped. The bruises circling her wrist were deep purple, fading to yellow-green at the edges, the distinctive pattern of fingers that had gripped too hard, held too long. They were recent enough to still be healing, old enough to have company. As she reached for her bucket, the collar of her uniform shifted, revealing another bruise along her collarbone, and another disappearing beneath the fabric. Damon's hand tightened around his briefcase. "It's late," he said quietly. The woman's head snapped up, and for just a second, before fear shuttered her expression into careful blankness, he saw her eyes. Brown, flecked with gold, wide with something that might have been recognition before she buried it under trained submission. "I'm sorry, sir." Her voice was barely above a whisper as she struggled to her feet, one hand braced against the wall for support, the other instinctively protecting her belly. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll finish up and—" "When did you start working here?" The question seemed to confuse her. 3 weeks ago, sir. Mrs. Chen hired me for the night shift. I promise I'm doing good work. I haven't broken anything. Look at me." She flinched at the command, but she obeyed, lifting her gaze to meet his for just a moment before looking away again. It was enough. The scar above her left eyebrow, thin, white, shaped like a fishhook, hadn't changed in 20 years. Neither had the stubborn set of her jaw or the way she held her shoulders back even when everything else about her screamed defeat. Damon felt the floor shift beneath him. "Alara?" The name hit her like a physical blow. She took a step back, shaking her head, her knuckles white around the mop handle. You have me confused with someone else. My name is Alara Quinn." His voice was rough, dragged up from a past he'd locked away in the same mental vault where he kept all his other childhood scars. "You got that scar when Marcus Delgado tried to take my lunch money and you hit him with a cafeteria tray. You were 9 years old and you didn't even know my name yet, but you saw him corner me and you didn't hesitate." Her face had gone pale beneath the exhaustion. "That was a long time ago. 20 years. Damon set down his briefcase with deliberate care, giving her space, reading the tension in her body like he'd read 1,000 hostile negotiations. "You moved away after 6th grade. Your mom got a job in Boston or Baltimore. I don't remember which. I never saw you again. Sir, I really need to finish." How long have you been running? The question stopped her mid-retreat. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the ventilation system and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the entrance hall. Then Alara's shoulders sagged, just slightly, and Damon saw the girl he'd once known flicker across her face, the one who'd shared her sandwich with him when his foster parents forgot to pack him lunch, who'd walked him home through the bad neighborhoods because she wasn't afraid of anything, who'd made him believe that maybe the world wasn't entirely made of people who hurt you. "I'm not running," she said quietly. "I'm working. At 2 in the morning, while pregnant, cleaning floors that don't need cleaning. I need the money. There are easier ways to earn money than night shifts that could put you into early labor." Her laugh was bitter, brief. "Not for someone like me." "Someone like you?" Damon took a careful step closer, watching her track the movement like a deer tracking a wolf. "What does that mean?" Alara's hand moved to her belly again, that unconscious protective gesture. "No references? No permanent address? No history. I want anyone checking too closely." She met his eyes with something that might have been defiance if it wasn't wrapped in so much exhaustion. Mrs. Chen asked fewer questions than most. She needed someone for the graveyard shift. I needed to disappear. It worked for both of us. Disappear from what? That's not your concern. The bruises on your wrists suggest otherwise. She pulled her sleeve down immediately, covering the evidence. "I'm clumsy. I fall sometimes." "Don't." The word came out sharper than he'd intended, and Damon forced himself to soften his tone. "Don't insult both of us with that lie. I've seen what domestic violence looks like, Alara. I grew up seeing it. So did you." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away with practiced efficiency. "What do you want me to say? That I made bad choices? That I trusted the wrong person? That I should have known better?" Her voice cracked. "I already know all of that. I live with it every day, but I'm handling it. By working yourself into the ground while someone's baby, my baby." The words were fierce, protective. "Mine, not his, not anymore." There it was, the confirmation Damon had already suspected, delivered with a mother's primal claim to her child. He studied her face, the lines of stress carved too deep for someone barely 30, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the way she held herself like someone expecting the next blow to land any second. "Does he know where you are?" Damon asked quietly. "No." Alara's hand trembled slightly as she pushed a stray hair behind her ear. "I was careful. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't leave a trail. I just left. People don't just leave relationships like that without the other person coming after them. He doesn't know about this place. He doesn't know about Mrs. Chen or the estate or any of it. I made sure." Damon heard what she wasn't saying, that she'd been careful before and it hadn't been careful enough, that running was something she'd practiced, that fear was her constant companion. He recognized it because he'd seen it in the mirror often enough during his own brutal childhood, before he'd learned to weaponize it instead of drowning in it. "What's his name?" he asked. "Why?" "Because I'm going to make sure he never finds you." Alara's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "You can't promise that. You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of." "Try me." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the cold promise of violence held in check, made her actually look at him. Really look, for the first time since he'd said her name. He watched her process what she saw. The expensive suit that cost more than most people made in a month. The confidence that came from owning every room he entered. The scars on his knuckles that no amount of money could completely hide. The eyes that had seen enough darkness to recognize it in others. "You're not the same person I knew?" she said slowly. "Neither are you." Damon kept his voice gentle despite the anger building in his chest. Not at her, never at her, but at whatever had put those bruises on her skin and that fear in her eyes. "But some things don't change. You helped me when no one else would. When I was nobody, nothing, just another foster kid who'd probably end up dead or in prison. You saw me anyway. That was different." "How?" "You were just a kid who needed a friend. And you're just a woman who needs safety." He paused. "Let me help you, Alara." She was already shaking her head before he finished speaking. "I don't need charity. I don't need to be saved. I just need to keep my head down, earn enough money to..." "To what?" Find another place to run to when this one stops feeling safe? Keep cleaning floors at 2 in the morning until your body gives out? Hope that he never gets lucky, never catches a break, never finds the one person who knows someone who saw you somewhere? Damon took another step closer, and this time she didn't retreat. You saved my life once. Multiple times, actually. You think I'm going to stand here and watch you slowly destroy yourself when I can do something about it? You don't owe me anything. This isn't about debt. Then what is it about? He wanted to say loyalty. He wanted to say justice. He wanted to say that seeing her like this, broken down and terrified and trying so hard to be invisible, made him want to burn down whoever had done this to her. But none of those words would get through her defenses, so he tried the truth instead. It's about the fact that you're the only person from my childhood who didn't treat me like garbage, and I'm not going to let you scrub floors in the middle of the night while you're carrying a baby. It's about the fact that I have resources you need and you have too much pride to ask for them, so I'm offering. It's about... He stopped, searched for the right words. It's about the fact that I can help, and that should be enough. Elara was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face for something. Deception, maybe, or pity, or the kind of ulterior motives she'd probably learned to expect from men. Whatever she found seemed to surprise her, because her shoulders dropped slightly, some of the defensive tension leaking out. His name is Trent, she said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. Trent Voss. We were together for 3 years before I got pregnant. He seemed normal at first, charming even, attentive. Then little things started changing. He didn't like my friends. He thought my job took too much time away from him. He wanted to know where I was every minute. She closed her eyes. I told myself it was love, that he was just protective, that I was lucky to have someone who cared so much. When did it get physical? 6 months ago. I mentioned that I wanted to visit my mom in Baltimore for Christmas, and he snapped, said I was trying to leave him, that I was ungrateful, that I didn't appreciate everything he did for me. Her hand moved to her ribs, touching a spot that probably still hurt. I didn't go to Baltimore. I learned not to mention leaving. Damon's jaw tightened. And when you got pregnant? He lost it. The words came faster now, like a dam breaking. Said I'd trapped him, ruined his life, that he never wanted kids. He told me to get rid of it. When I refused, she gestured vaguely at her body, at the bruises hidden beneath her uniform. It got worse, a lot worse. He started drinking more, staying out later, coming home angry. So you left. I waited until he passed out after a bender, took whatever cash I could find, whatever clothes I could carry, and I ran. I've been moving ever since, different cities, different jobs, different names. I thought New York would be far enough, big enough to disappear in. She laughed without humor. I thought I was being smart. You were being a survivor, Damon said firmly. There's a difference. Survivors don't end up scrubbing floors at 2 in the morning while their ex swears he'll find them and make them pay. He threatened you? He texted me. I don't know how he got the new number. I changed it 3 times. But he found it anyway. Said he'd track me down, that I couldn't hide forever, that the baby was his and I had no right to keep it from him. Her voice shook. That was 2 weeks ago. I threw away the phone and bought another one. Haven't heard from him since, but you're waiting for him to find you anyway. It's only a matter of time. Elara's hand rested on her belly, her expression fierce despite the fear. He's relentless. He won't stop. And when he finds me, he won't. You can't know that. Yes, Damon said quietly, with the absolute certainty of someone who'd built an empire on making impossible promises and keeping them. I can. Elara stared at him for a long moment. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. Why do you care? Because you fed me when I was hungry. Because you walked me home when I was scared. Because you made 6th grade bearable when everything else in my life was hell. Because you saw me, really saw me, when everyone else looked through me like I was already gone. But he couldn't say any of that, not without making this about his past instead of her future. So he settled for something simpler. Because you deserve better than this, he said, and because I have the power to make sure you get it. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face, and she didn't seem to notice or care. I don't even know who you are anymore. What you do, how you... She gestured at the mansion around them. All of this. Does it matter? It might. Fair enough. Damon had built his empire on secrets and shadows, on doing the things no one else would do and asking questions no one else dared ask. He'd made fortunes and broken rivals, established territories and eliminated threats, all while maintaining the facade of a legitimate businessman. His world was dark, dangerous, and often brutal. But it was his, and he ruled it absolutely. "I'm not a good man," he said carefully. "I've done things that would horrify you. I've made choices that can't be unmade. But I'm very good at protecting what's mine, and I'm very, very good at making problems disappear. I'm not asking you to... I know what you're not asking. I'm telling you what I'm offering." He held her gaze. "Safe housing. Better than the room you're probably renting by the week. Medical care, real medical care. Not emergency room visits you can't afford. Security, resources. Time to figure out what comes next without constantly looking over your shoulder. In exchange for what?" "Nothing." Alara shook her head. "Nobody offers that much for nothing." "I'm not nobody, and you're not nothing." Damon picked up his briefcase, signaling that the conversation was approaching its end whether she was ready or not. "Think about it. You know where to find me." "But Alara?" She looked up. "Stop working the night shift. Tomorrow, you're reassigned to day hours, lighter duty. I'll speak to Mrs. Chen." "I can't afford to lose the night differential pay. Your salary just doubled, retroactive to your first day." He started walking toward the stairs, then paused. "And throw away whatever phone you're using. I'll have a new one delivered tomorrow, completely secure. If Trent Voss somehow tracked you once, he can track you again." "Wait." But Damon was already climbing the stairs, leaving her standing in the hallway with her bucket and mop, and the first real hope she'd probably felt in months. He didn't look back. If he did, if he saw her standing there looking lost and afraid, and desperately trying not to believe that someone might actually help her without demanding pieces of her soul in return, he'd do something stupid like promise to burn Trent Voss alive. Which, to be fair, was already on his agenda. He just needed to be smart about it. The next morning, Damon was in his office before dawn, making calls that required privacy and leverage in equal measure. His head of security, a former Marine named Vincent Caruso, who asked few questions and solved many problems, arrived at 6 with coffee and a file folder. "The maid," Vincent said without preamble, setting the folder on Damon's desk. "Alara Quinn, currently going by Alara Marsh. 29 years old. No criminal record. Worked as a pediatric nurse in Boston until 8 months ago, when she quit without notice and disappeared. Previous employer marked her as not eligible for rehire due to abandoning her position, but one of her former coworkers said off the record that she left because she was afraid of someone." "Trent Voss." Vincent's eyebrow rose slightly. "You already know about him?" "She told me." "What do we have?" 32, sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. Lives in Boston, drives a leased BMW, likes to spend weekends at bars where he can flash money and impress women half his age. Vincent pulled out a photo, professional headshot, expensive suit, the kind of smile that probably worked on people who didn't know better. 2 domestic disturbance calls to his residence in the past year, both times the woman declined to press charges. 1 DUI that got reduced to reckless driving because his lawyer's good. No outstanding warrants, no active investigations. Which means he's smart enough to stay off the radar. Or connected enough to make problems go away. Damon studied the photograph, memorizing the face of the man who'd put bruises on Alara's wrists and fear in her eyes. Trent Voss looked ordinary, pleasant even. The kind of man who held doors open and said please and thank you, and probably had a mother who thought he was a perfect gentleman. "Has he been to New York recently?" Damon asked. "Checking now. I've got someone monitoring his credit cards, social media, phone records. If he so much as Googles New York City, we'll know about it." Vincent paused. "You want me to arrange a conversation?" The offer was delicate, layered with implications. Conversation in Vincent's world could mean anything from a polite warning to a permanent solution, depending on what Damon authorized. It was tempting, God, it was tempting, to simply make Trent Voss disappear, the way he'd made dozens of other problems disappear over the years. But Alara had been a nurse. She'd spent her career helping people, healing them, believing in systems and rules and justice. If Damon solved her problem with violence, even justified violence, she'd never forgive him. She'd never trust him. And more importantly, she'd never believe she could be safe without him, which would trap her in a different kind of prison. Not yet, Damon said. Right now, we focus on making sure he can't get within 100 miles of her. I want surveillance on his movements, alerts if he travels, monitoring of any attempts to locate her. If he starts digging, I want to know before his shovel hits dirt. And the woman herself? What about her? Vincent's expression was carefully neutral. Mrs. Chen is confused about the sudden changes to Alara's schedule and salary. She's worried she did something wrong. You'll explain to Mrs. Chen that Alara Quinn is under my personal protection and that any questions about her employment should be directed to me. You'll also explain that Alara's privacy is to be absolutely protected. No staff gossip, no questions, nothing that makes her feel like she's under a microscope. Understood. Vincent made a note. The cottage? Damon had been thinking about this since last night. The estate had several buildings scattered across the property. A main house, guest quarters, staff housing, and a small cottage near the gardens that had been his refuge when he first bought the place. It was private, secure, comfortable without being ostentatious. Perfect for someone who needed space but not isolation. Have it cleaned and prepared, he said. Full kitchen, private entrance, security system connected to the main grid. I want it ready by end of day. She might not accept. I know. You're not going to force the issue? Damon looked up at Vincent, who'd worked for him long enough to know when to push and when to shut up. When have I ever forced anyone to accept my protection? Fair point. Vincent gathered up the file. One more thing, the baby. She's due in about 6 weeks according to the medical records we pulled. Does she have a doctor, a hospital, a plan for... Schedule an appointment with Dr. Sarah Mitchell at Manhattan General. Tell her I'm covering all expenses and that patient privacy is paramount. If she has questions, she can call me directly. Vincent nodded and turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Boss? This woman, she's important to you? Damon could have deflected. Could have made it about strategy or debt or simple human decency. But Vincent had been with him for 7 years, had seen him navigate shark-infested waters without flinching, and deserved something closer to honesty. She saved my life when we were kids, Damon said quietly. Multiple times. She didn't have to. She gained nothing from it. She just did it anyway, because that's who she was. And now you're returning the favor. Now I'm making sure she gets the chance to be that person again, without fear, without looking over her shoulder. He met Vincent's eyes. Whatever it takes. Vincent nodded once, understanding perfectly. Whatever it takes. Us. Alara didn't show up for work that day. Damon tried not to panic. Tried to tell himself she was just adjusting to the new schedule. Or maybe she'd decided to quit rather than accept his help. Or perhaps she was sleeping off months of exhaustion now that she finally had permission to rest. But by evening, when Mrs. Chen confirmed that Alara hadn't responded to any messages or returned to her rented room, the worry became something harder to ignore. Vincent found her at 8 o'clock that night, sitting on a bench in Central Park with a paper bag full of her belongings and nowhere to go. She got evicted, Vincent explained when he called Damon. Landlord found out she was pregnant and decided she was too much of a liability. Gave her an hour to pack up and get out. Technically illegal, but she wasn't about to argue with him. Damon closed his eyes, fighting the rage that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained control. Where is she now? Still on the bench. Won't let me bring her to the estate. Says she's fine. She'll figure something out. She's handled worse. Put her on the phone. There was a rustling sound, a murmured conversation, then Alara's voice, exhausted, stubborn, proud even in defeat. I don't need rescuing. That bench you're sitting on is 52 degrees right now, Damon said calmly. It's supposed to drop to 38 tonight. You're 7 months pregnant with nowhere to sleep and a bag full of everything you own. Still think you don't need rescuing? I'll find a shelter. I've done it before. The shelters are full. Vincent already checked. Silence. Then quietly, I'll be fine. Alara. He softened his tone, trying to reach the girl he'd once known beneath all the fear and pride. I had the cottage prepared for you. It's small, private, completely separate from the main house. No one will bother you. No one will ask questions. You can stay as long as you need. A night, a week, a month. However long it takes to figure out your next move. I can't afford. It's part of your employment package. Consider it staff housing. That's not. It's what I'm offering, he said firmly. You can accept it gracefully, or you can sit on that bench until hypothermia makes the decision for you. Your choice. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could practically feel her internal war between pride and pragmatism. Finally, just for tonight. Just for tonight, he agreed, knowing it was a lie they both needed to believe. Give the phone back to Vincent. When Vincent came back on the line, Damon's voice was hard. Bring her to the cottage, make sure she has everything she needs. Food, clothes, whatever. And Vincent? Find out who her landlord is. I want a name and address. Planning to have a conversation? Planning to make sure he understands the consequences of exploiting vulnerable women. Understood. Damon hung up and stood at his office window, looking out over the grounds of his estate. Somewhere out there, Ilara was accepting help she didn't want from a man she barely knew anymore, because the world had left her no other options. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And it sure as hell wasn't going to continue if he had anything to say about it. His phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. She's in. Refusing dinner, but I left supplies in the kitchen. We'll maintain distance per your orders. Damon typed back. Good. Keep me updated. Then he poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and tried very hard not to think about Ilara sitting alone in that cottage, probably crying, probably terrified, probably wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake trusting him. He'd prove her wrong. Whatever it took. Some debts, after all, could never truly be repaid, but they could be honored. And Damon Kessler had built an empire on keeping his word, especially when no one expected him to. The girl who'd shared her sandwich 20 years ago deserved nothing less. Ilara woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, in a bed softer than anything she'd slept on in months, with the unfamiliar sensation of not being afraid. The confusion lasted only seconds before memory crashed back. The eviction, the park bench, Vincent's quiet insistence, and finally the cottage that had appeared like something out of a dream when she'd been too exhausted to keep refusing. She sat up slowly, one hand bracing her lower back where the baby had been pressing against her spine all night, and took inventory of her surroundings. The cottage was exactly as Damon had described, small but immaculate, with warm wooden floors and furniture that looked comfortable without being showy. The kitchen visible through the open doorway was stocked. She'd checked last night, unable to believe it, and there were fresh towels in the bathroom, clean sheets on the bed, even a robe hanging on the back of the door in her size. It felt like a trap. It felt too good to be true. It felt like the kind of thing that would be ripped away the moment she let herself believe in it. Her phone, the new one that had appeared on the cottage doorstep yesterday morning in a box with no note, buzzed on the nightstand. A message from an unknown number. Dr. Mitchell's office. You have an appointment scheduled for 10 a.m. today. Car will pick you up at 9:30. Confirmation not required. Ilara stared at the message, her throat tight. She'd been managing her pregnancy the way she managed everything else lately, with free clinic visits when she could get them, generic prenatal vitamins from the pharmacy, and a constant low-level terror that something would go wrong and she'd have no way to fix it. The idea of an actual doctor, an actual appointment, care that didn't involve waiting 4 hours in a plastic chair surrounded by other desperate people, was almost too much to process. She typed back, I didn't ask for this. The response came immediately. You didn't have to. No signature. No explanation. Just the simple truth that Damon Kessler had decided she needed medical care and had made it happen, whether she wanted it or not. Ilara wanted to be angry about it, about the presumption, the control, the way he was rearranging her life without permission. But the baby kicked hard against her ribs, reminding her that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She deleted the message and went to take a shower in a bathroom with water pressure that actually worked. The car that arrived at 9:30 was black, expensive, and driven by a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Maria and didn't ask a single personal question during the 20-minute drive to Manhattan General. The hospital itself was the kind of place Ilara had only seen in movies, gleaming, modern, with art on the walls and staff who smiled instead of looking harassed. The woman at the reception desk had her name on a list, marked with a notation that made the receptionist's eyebrows rise slightly before she plastered on an extra bright smile. Ms. Quinn, Dr. Mitchell is expecting you, if you'll just follow me. The examination room was private, quiet, nothing like the curtained-off spaces she'd endured at free clinics. Dr. Mitchell turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that put Alara slightly at ease. "Let's see how you and baby are doing," Dr. Mitchell said, helping Alara onto the examination table. "When was your last prenatal visit?" 6 weeks ago, in Philadelphia." "And before that?" Alara looked away. "Boston, 3 months before that." Dr. Mitchell didn't comment on the gaps, didn't lecture or judge, just made notes on her tablet and began the examination with gentle, practiced hands. The ultrasound revealed a healthy baby girl, active, proper size, heartbeat strong, and Alara felt something crack open in her chest when the doctor turned the screen so she could see. "She's beautiful," Dr. Mitchell said softly. "Due date looks like late April, early May. Have you thought about where you'd like to deliver?" No, I didn't know if I'd still be in New York by then." "Well, you're here now, and I'd like to see you weekly for the rest of your pregnancy, given the gaps in your care and the fact that you're showing signs of significant stress." Dr. Mitchell pulled off her gloves, her expression serious but not unkind. "Alara, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you safe where you're living?" The question hit like a punch. "Yes." "Are you afraid of anyone?" Alara's hands clenched on the edge of the examination table. "Not anymore. Not right now." "But you were." It wasn't a question. Dr. Mitchell had obviously seen the medical records from Boston, had probably noted the old bruises that were still fading on Alara's ribs and arms, had definitely been briefed by whoever had set up this appointment about the situation she was walking into. "I left him," Alara said quietly. "Months ago. I'm not going back." "Good." Dr. Mitchell sat down on the rolling stool, meeting Alara's eyes directly. "Because stress like what you've been under, chronic, ongoing, traumatic stress, can affect pregnancy outcomes. Premature labor, low birth weight, complications during delivery. Your body has been in survival mode for too long, and your baby is feeling it too." "I know. I'm trying to—" "You're doing the best you can with what you have," Dr. Mitchell interrupted gently. "I can see that. But now you have more resources available, and I'm going to strongly encourage you to use them. That means keeping your appointments, eating regular meals, getting adequate rest, and letting yourself accept help when it's offered." "I'm not good at that last part. Most strong women aren't." Dr. Mitchell smiled slightly. "But strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to let others carry some of the weight so you don't break under it." Alara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "He didn't ask me. Damon, he just did all of this." "Would you have said yes if he asked?" "No." "Then he was smart. And if I'm reading the situation correctly, he's giving you space to decide what comes next without pressure. That's not control, Alara. That's respect." Dr. Mitchell stood, handing Alara her prescription and a folder full of information. "I'll see you next week. Same time. And Alara, try to sleep. Your body is building a human. It needs rest." Maria drove her back to the estate in the same comfortable silence as before, and Alara spent the drive staring out the window, trying to reconcile the girl she'd been. The one who'd worked double shifts to put herself through nursing school, who'd believed in systems and rules and doing things the right way, with the woman she'd become, accepting charity from a crime boss because the alternative was a park bench and a baby born into homelessness. When they pulled up to the cottage, Vincent was waiting outside with grocery bags. "Delivery," he said simply, setting them on the porch. "Mrs. Chen wanted to make sure you had proper food." Her words, not mine. Alara looked at the bags, fresh vegetables, good cuts of meat, bread that smelled like it came from an actual bakery, fruit that didn't have bruises. "This is too much." "Take it up with Mrs. Chen. She's terrifying when she's determined to feed someone." Vincent turned to leave, then paused. "The boss wanted me to tell you that there's a laptop inside if you need it. Password is taped to the screen. Internet secure." "Why would I need—" "In case you want to look for jobs, research options, whatever." He shrugged. He figured you might want to start planning your next move now that you're not spending all your energy just surviving. The observation was so accurate it hurt. Alara had been in survival mode for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to think beyond the next meal, the next place to sleep, the next potential disaster. The idea of planning, of having options, of thinking past tomorrow was foreign and frightening and desperately appealing all at once. Thank you, she said quietly. Vincent nodded and walked away, leaving her alone with enough food to feed a family and the unfamiliar luxury of choice. She was unpacking his groceries when her phone buzzed again. This time, the message made her stomach drop. Unknown number, found you. Did you really think you could hide from me? We need to talk, now. Alara's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped a carton of eggs. It wasn't possible. She'd been so careful. New phone, new name, no social media, no contact with anyone from her old life. How could Trent have found her? The phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at it, paralyzed, until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another text. Answer your phone, Alara. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Her finger hovered over the callback button. Every instinct she'd developed over 3 years with Trent screamed at her to answer, to placate, to manage his anger before it escalated. But another voice, quieter, newer, the one that had started speaking up since she'd arrived at the cottage, said something different. She opened her contacts and called the only other number saved in the phone. Damon answered on the first ring. What's wrong? How did you... You only call if something's wrong. What happened? Alara closed her eyes, hating how transparent she was, how easily he read her panic. He found me. Trent. He just texted me. He's calling. He knows I'm here. Are you in the cottage? Yes. Stay there. Lock the doors. I'm sending Vincent. Don't answer any calls or texts except from this number. Damon, I don't want you to... 5 minutes. I'll be there in 5 minutes. He hung up before she could argue. Alara locked the doors with trembling hands and backed into the corner of the living room where she could see both entrances. The phone kept buzzing, texts, calls, voicemails piling up with mathematical precision. She didn't look at them. She just counted her breaths and waited for Damon to arrive, hating herself for needing rescue, hating Trent for hunting her, hating the whole situation that had turned her into someone who hid in corners, waiting for men to solve her problems. When the knock came, she nearly jumped out of her skin. Alara, it's me. She unlocked the door. Damon stood there in a dark suit, his expression calm except for his eyes, which were absolutely furious. Behind him, Vincent waited in the car, phone pressed to his ear. Show me, Damon said. Alara handed him the phone with shaking hands. He scrolled through the messages, his jaw tightening with each one, then pulled out his own phone and made a call. Marcus, I need a trace on a number. Send it to your secure line. I want to know location, service provider, and how recently it was activated. He paused. Yes, now. I don't care what you're doing. He hung up and looked at Alara. How long since you changed this number? Yesterday. It's the one you had delivered. Which means only 3 people have it. You, me, and Dr. Mitchell's office. His eyes narrowed. Did you give this number to anyone else? Anyone at all? No, I didn't even know the number myself until this morning. Damon's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then his expression went from angry to absolutely cold. You're sure? All right. Keep monitoring. If that number pings anywhere in a 100-mile radius of this location, I want to know immediately. He disconnected and handed Alara's phone back to her. It's not him. What? The number that's been texting you is a burner phone purchased in Boston 3 days ago and currently pinging off a cell tower in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Trent Voss is at work right now. Vincent's been watching him all week. This is someone else using his name to scare you. Alara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. That doesn't make sense. Who would... Someone who knows about your situation and wants you frightened. A friend of his, maybe. Or someone he hired to track you down. Damon's voice was gentle despite the rage simmering beneath it. Either way, they don't have your actual location. If they did, they wouldn't be fishing with threats. They'd already be here. But they have this number. How? That's what we're going to find out. He gestured to the sofa. Sit down before you fall down. You're pale as a sheet. Alara sat, more because her legs wouldn't hold her than because he'd told her to. I don't understand. I was so careful. I know you were. Damon sat beside her, careful to maintain distance, his tone shifting to something softer. Someone leaked the number, which means we have a security problem. Vincent's already investigating. But Alara, listen to me. This person doesn't know where you are. They're throwing out bait, hoping you'll panic and respond with information they can use. I almost called him back. But you didn't. You called me instead. That was smart. It was terrified. Smart and terrified aren't mutually exclusive. He pulled out his own phone and showed her a blocked number. I'm going to call this number back from a secure line. I'm going to find out who they are and what they want. And then I'm going to make sure they never contact you again. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Ilara looked at him, really looked, and saw the boy who'd shared her lunch table underneath the man who ran an empire built on shadows. The boy who'd been terrified every day, but had never let it stop him. The boy who'd learned to survive by being smarter, harder, more ruthless than everyone else, but who'd never forgotten the people who'd been kind when kindness was dangerous. I trust you, she said quietly. I don't know why, but I do. Miss, something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or relief. Then let me handle this. You focus on taking care of yourself and the baby. That's your job right now. Everything else is mine. He stood to leave, then hesitated. The laptop Vincent mentioned. There's a folder on the desktop labeled Resources. Inside are contact numbers for support services, legal aid, housing assistance, job placement programs. All verified, all safe, all available if you decide you want to use them. You researched all of that? I had people research it. You deserve to know what your options are, Ilara. Not just the ones I'm offering, but all of them. So when you make decisions about your future, you're making them with complete information. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Why do you care this much? I was just a kid who shared her sandwich with you 20 years ago. That doesn't explain... She gestured at the cottage, at everything. All of this. Damon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. You were the only person in my entire childhood who saw me as human. Not a foster kid to be endured, not a problem to be managed, not a statistic waiting to happen. Just a person. Someone worth sitting with, worth protecting, even when it cost you. He met her eyes. That's not something I forget, Ilara. That's not something that expires because time passed and circumstances changed. You gave me dignity when I had nothing else. Now I'm in a position to return the favor, and I'm damn well going to take it. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Ilara sat in the silence of the cottage, one hand on her belly where the baby was moving, and tried to reconcile the terrified boy from her memory with the dangerous man who'd just walked out. They were the same person. They were completely different, and somehow, impossibly, she trusted both of them with her life. That night, lying in bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of safety, wind in the trees instead of footsteps in hallways, quiet instead of shouting, peace instead of perpetual fear, Ilara opened the laptop and found the folder Damon had mentioned. Inside were dozens of files, each one meticulously organized. Domestic violence resources, legal services, housing programs, job training, financial planning, childcare options, even a document outlining her rights as a pregnant woman in New York. At the bottom of the folder was a single text file labeled Read This. She opened it. These are your options. All of them, not just mine. You can stay in the cottage as long as you need, or you can use these resources to build something independent. You can accept my help, or you can decline it. You can trust me, or you can walk away. Whatever you choose, you'll have the information and resources to make it work. The only thing I ask is that you choose based on what you want, not on what you think you owe me or what you're afraid of. You deserve better than a life built on fear. You always did. Ilara read it 3 times, then closed the laptop and cried for the first time since she'd arrived at the estate. Not from fear or exhaustion or despair, but from something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Ilara kept her appointments with Dr. Mitchell, who pronounced the baby healthy and thriving despite everything. She ate regular meals from Mrs. Chen's generous deliveries and slowly stopped flinching every time someone knocked on the door. She explored the laptop's resources and made lists of possibilities. Nursing programs that would accept her returning credentials, affordable childcare options, neighborhoods where she could afford rent once she had steady income. Damon kept his distance, communicating mostly through Vincent or brief text messages that were purely informational. The threatening calls had stopped completely after that first day. And while Alara didn't know what Damon had done to make that happen, she also didn't ask. Some things were better left mysterious, but every few days she'd find something new. A book about pregnancy and newborn care on her doorstep, a gift card to a maternity store tucked under her door, a list of pediatricians who came highly recommended. Never anything too personal. Never anything that felt like obligation. Just quiet gestures that said, "I'm here if you need me," without demanding anything in return. It was during the third week that Alara finally sought him out on purpose. She found Damon in his office late one evening, working through paperwork with the focused intensity she remembered from their childhood. That complete absorption in whatever task was in front of him, like the rest of the world could wait until he was finished. "Do you have a minute?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something more welcoming. "Of course. Come in." Alara stepped into the office, taking in the dark wood and expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the estate grounds. It was exactly what she'd expected. Powerful, controlled, nothing soft or vulnerable anywhere in sight except maybe the photo on his desk of a younger Damon with an older couple who had kind eyes. "Your parents?" she asked. "Foster parents, the good ones. They took me in after you left, helped me finish high school, paid for college, even though I barely graduated." His smile was brief, bittersweet. "They died in a car accident my junior year. Drunk driver." "I'm sorry." "Me too." He set down his pen. "But you didn't come here to talk about my history. What do you need?" Alara sat in the chair across from his desk, suddenly nervous despite having rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. "I want to go back to nursing. Not right away. Not until after the baby comes and I've recovered, but eventually. It's what I'm good at. It's what I love, and I think I can be that person again. The one who helps people. If I can just get past all of this." "You never stopped being that person," Damon said quietly. "Circumstances just made it harder to see." "Maybe, but I need to rebuild my credentials, pass my licensing boards again, prove I'm capable of returning to practice. And I need to do it without—" she struggled for the right words. "Without this becoming your project. I need it to be mine." "Understood." He didn't look offended or surprised, just thoughtful. "What do you need from me?" "Time, space, maybe some connections when I'm ready to start applying for positions, but only if it's legitimate. No special favors, no calling in markers, just professional references based on actual qualifications." She met his eyes. "I need to know I can do this on my own, that I'm not just surviving because you're protecting me, but because I'm strong enough to protect myself." Damon leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You know what I see when I look at you? A charity case? A survivor who's been fighting impossible odds for months and still hasn't given up. Someone who's pregnant, displaced, traumatized, and still planning for a future instead of just enduring the present. That takes strength most people don't have, Alara. So when you say you need to prove you're capable, I want you to understand something. You've already proven it. Every day you didn't give up. Every time you chose to keep going even when giving up would have been easier. That's strength. That's capability." Alara felt her throat tighten. "Then why does it feel like I'm drowning? Because you've been holding your breath underwater for months and you just came up for air. Your body doesn't know the difference between safety and danger yet. It just knows survival." He stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "It gets easier. Not quickly and not without setbacks. But it does get easier." "You sound like you know from experience." "I do." He turned back to face her. "After my good foster parents died, I spent a year trying to prove I could handle everything alone. Worked 3 jobs, finished school, pretended I was fine. I wasn't. I was barely functioning, and then someone, a professor actually, sat me down and told me that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was strategy. That smart people leveraged available resources instead of refusing them out of pride. Did you listen? Eventually, once I stopped being an idiot about it." His smile was self-deprecating. "So here's what I'm offering, and you can take it or leave it. I know people in the medical community, legitimate people, ethical people who hire based on qualifications, not connections. When you're ready, I'll make introductions. What you do with those introductions is entirely up to you. I won't interfere, I won't apply pressure, I won't do anything except open a door. You walk through it or you don't. That's it?" That's it. Everything else, the cottage, the medical care, the security, that's yours regardless of what you decide about nursing or anything else. No strings, no conditions, just, he struggled for words, just making sure you have the space to figure out who you want to be now instead of who trauma forced you to become. Alara stood, crossed to where he was standing, and did something that surprised both of them. She hugged him. It was brief, awkward, neither of them really knowing how to navigate physical closeness after so many years apart, but it was real. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for remembering, for caring when you didn't have to." Damon's arms came around her carefully, like he was afraid she might break. "You're welcome. And Alara, you're going to be an amazing mother. That baby has no idea how lucky she is." When she pulled away, she was crying again, but this time it didn't feel like breaking. It felt like healing. She was halfway to the door when Damon called her name. She turned back. "The threat stopped because I made some calls," he said quietly. "The person who was contacting you was a private investigator Trent hired to track you down. I explained, very clearly, what would happen if they continued looking. They've since closed the case and refunded Trent's money with a recommendation that he seek legal counsel instead of vigilante justice. And Trent is being watched. If he makes a move toward New York, I'll know before he gets within 50 miles. If he tries to hire someone else, I'll know. If he so much as Googles your name, I'll know." Damon's expression was absolutely serious. "You're safe, Alara. I'm making sure of it." She should have been disturbed by the casual display of power, by the implication of surveillance and threats delivered through shadowy channels. But all she felt was relief. "Thank you," she said again, and meant it with everything she had. That night, for the first time since she'd left Boston, Alara slept without nightmares. The nightmares returned 3 weeks later, but they came from a different direction entirely. Alara was in the cottage kitchen making tea when the first contraction hit, a tightening across her belly that stole her breath and sent the mug crashing to the floor. She gripped the counter, counting seconds until it passed, then checked her phone with shaking hands. 34 weeks. Too early. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another 6 weeks. "It's just Braxton Hicks," she told herself, using the clinical voice she'd perfected as a nurse. Practice contractions. Completely normal. Nothing to worry about. The second contraction came 12 minutes later, stronger than the first, and Alara's clinical detachment shattered. She grabbed her phone and called Dr. Mitchell's emergency line. "Contractions?" Dr. Mitchell's voice was calm, professional. "How far apart?" 12 minutes, maybe less. "They're strong. Real. This isn't practice." "Any bleeding? Fluid?" "No, just pain and pressure. A lot of pressure." "I want you at the hospital. Now. Don't drive yourself. Call someone, get an ambulance, whatever you need. I'll meet you there." Alara's hands trembled as she disconnected and scrolled to Damon's number. It was past midnight. He was probably asleep. She shouldn't bother him. She could call an ambulance, handle this herself. She'd been handling everything herself for months. The third contraction doubled her over and she pressed the call button. "Alara?" Damon's voice was alert, instantly concerned. "What's wrong?" "I think—" She had to stop, breathe through the pain. "I think I'm in labor. It's too early. The baby's not ready. I need to get to the hospital, but I can't. I'm coming. Don't move. Stay on the line with me." She heard rustling footsteps, a door opening. Then his voice again, steady and certain in a way that made her want to cry with relief. "Vincent's pulling the car around. We'll be there in 2 minutes. Are you having another contraction?" "Not yet. They're about 10 minutes apart now." "That's good. That means we have time. Dr. Mitchell?" "Called her. She's meeting us there." "Perfect. You're doing great, Alara. Just breathe. We've got this." "We." As if her crisis was his crisis. As if her terror was something he could shoulder alongside her instead of making her carry it alone. Alara closed her eyes and focused on his voice, letting it anchor her while her body betrayed her with contractions that came faster and harder with each passing minute. The car ride to Manhattan General was a blur of pain and panic. Damon sat beside her in the back seat, his hand wrapped around hers, his voice low and calm as he talked her through each contraction. Vincent drove with controlled urgency, navigating traffic like he was defusing a bomb. Quick, efficient, no wasted movement. Almost there, Damon said as another contraction peaked. Squeeze my hand, harder. You're not going to hurt me. Alara squeezed until her knuckles went white, until the pain crested and finally, mercifully, began to ebb. I can't do this. It's too soon. She's not ready. She's a fighter, just like her mother. He brushed damp hair back from her forehead with his free hand. And you're not alone. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. The hospital staff was waiting when they arrived. Dr. Mitchell must have called ahead. They had a wheelchair ready, monitors prepped, a room cleared. Everything moved with choreographed efficiency as they transferred Alara from the car to the chair to the bed, stripping away her clothes and replacing them with a hospital gown, while asking questions she could barely process through the haze of fear and pain. 34 weeks? A nurse confirmed, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around Alara's arm. Yes. Due date was early May. Any complications during pregnancy, bleeding, high blood pressure? No, nothing. Everything was fine until... Another contraction cut off her words. Dr. Mitchell appeared beside the bed, her expression serious but not panicked. Let's see what we're dealing with. Alara, I need you to stay as calm as possible. Stress isn't good for you or the baby right now. I'm terrified, Alara gasped. That's the opposite of calm. I know. But you're also strong and you're in the right place. We're going to take care of both of you. Doctor. Mitchell began the examination while the nurse monitored the fetal heart rate. You're 3 centimeters dilated. This is real labor, not false. But the baby's heartbeat is strong and steady, which is good news. Can you stop it? Alara heard the desperation in her own voice. The labor, can you make it stop? At 34 weeks, if we can delay delivery even a day or two, we give the baby's lungs more time to develop. I'm going to start you on medication to slow the contractions and steroids to help mature the baby's lungs faster. But Alara, Dr. Mitchell met her eyes. If the labor progresses despite treatment, we won't stop it. Your baby is far enough along that the risks of preventing birth outweigh the benefits. Do you understand? Alara nodded, unable to speak past the terror lodging in her throat. Good. Now I need you to try to relax. I know that sounds impossible, but tension makes contractions worse. Focus on breathing. Focus on the fact that you're exactly where you need to be. Dr. Mitchell turned to the nurse. Start the magnesium sulfate drip and get the steroid injection ready. And someone page the NICU team. I want them on standby. The next hours dissolved into a nightmare of pain and medication and monitors that beeped with relentless regularity. The magnesium made Alara feel like she was moving through water, her muscles heavy and uncooperative. The contractions slowed but didn't stop, each one a reminder that her body was determined to expel the baby weeks before she was ready to survive on her own. Through it all, Damon stayed. He sat in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand through contractions, wiping sweat from her forehead, talking to her in a low, steady voice that cut through the panic. He didn't flinch when she squeezed his hand hard enough to leave marks. He didn't leave when the nurses came to check her dilation or adjust her IV or do any of the dozen invasive, uncomfortable procedures that childbirth required. He just stayed, solid and present in a way Alara had forgotten men could be. You don't have to be here, she said during a brief reprieve between contractions, her voice hoarse from hours of controlled breathing. This isn't your responsibility. I know. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I'm here anyway. Why? Damon was quiet for a moment, his eyes on their joined hands. When I was 12, I broke my arm falling off a roof I wasn't supposed to be on. My foster parents at the time dropped me off at the emergency room and left. Said they'd come back when I was done. They didn't. I sat in that waiting room for 6 hours with a broken bone because the hospital wouldn't treat me without an adult present, and they couldn't reach anyone who gave a damn enough to show up. Alara felt tears sting her eyes. Damon? Eventually, a social worker came and sat with me so they could set the bone. But those 6 hours taught me something about what it feels like to be alone when you're scared and hurting. I swore if I ever had the chance to be the person who stayed instead of the person who left, I'd take it. He met her eyes. So I'm staying, not because I have to, because I want to. Before Alara could respond, another contraction hit, the strongest yet, and she lost herself in the wave of pain. When it finally passed, she realized Dr. Mitchell was back, checking the monitors with an expression that made Alara's stomach drop. "The contractions aren't slowing," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "You're at 5 centimeters now. The medication bought us some time, but your body is committed to delivering this baby." "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm being torn apart," Alara admitted. "I know, and I'm sorry, but here's where we are. We can let labor progress naturally, or we can do a C-section now and get the baby out in a controlled environment where the NICU team is ready. Either way, you're having this baby today." The words landed like a physical blow. Today. Not in 6 weeks when everything would be ready. Today, when the baby was too small and too early and might not survive. "What's safer?" Alara heard herself ask. "For her, not for me. What gives her the best chance?" Dr. Mitchell's expression softened. "Natural delivery is less invasive for you, lower risk of complications, faster recovery. C-section gets her out faster if there's fetal distress. Right now, her heart rate is stable, which suggests she's handling labor well. If that changes, we go to surgery immediately. But if it stays steady, I think letting your body do what it knows how to do gives you both the best outcome." "Then that's what we do." "Alara?" "That's what we do," she repeated, firmer this time. "Whatever gives her the best chance." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "All right. Then we're going to help you through this. You're going to meet your daughter today, and she's going to be small and early and probably need some NICU support, but she's going to be here, and that's what matters." The next hours were a blur of increasingly intense contractions, epidural discussions that Alara declined because she needed to feel what was happening, and nurses who coached her through breathing patterns while Damon stayed glued to her side. The pain reached levels she hadn't known were possible, waves that crashed over her with relentless frequency until she couldn't remember what it felt like to not hurt. "I can't," she sobbed during a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't do this anymore. It's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can," Damon's voice cut through her panic. "You've survived worse than this. You've survived things that should have broken you, and you're still here. You can do this. You don't understand." "You're right. I don't understand what labor feels like, but I understand fear. I understand pain. I understand wanting to give up because the alternative seems impossible." He leaned closer, his voice fierce. "But you're not giving up. Not now. Not when you're this close. Your daughter needs you to be strong for just a little bit longer." "I don't know if I have anything left." "Then borrow mine. Take whatever you need. Just don't quit." Something in his absolute certainty gave her strength she didn't know she still possessed. Alara gripped his hand and bore down through the next contraction, and the next, until Dr. Mitchell was saying she was fully dilated and it was time to push. "This is it," Dr. Mitchell said, positioned at the foot of the bed with the NICU team hovering nearby. "Next contraction, I need you to push with everything you have. Can you do that?" Alara nodded, too exhausted for words. The next contraction built like a tsunami, and when it peaked, she pushed. Once, twice, 3 times, until Dr. Mitchell was saying, "Stop, breathe, let me check." And then they were doing it again, and Alara lost count of how many times her body demanded she push, while her mind screamed that she couldn't possibly do this one more time. "I can see her head," Dr. Mitchell said. "One more big push, Alara. That's all. Just one more." "I can't." "You can," Damon said. "Look at me." Alara turned her head, met his eyes, dark and fierce and absolutely convinced she could do the impossible. "One more," he said. "Give her one more push and you get to meet your daughter." The next contraction hit, and Alara pushed with everything she had left, every ounce of strength, every bit of stubbornness, every desperate prayer that the baby would be okay. She pushed until she felt something give way, until Dr. Mitchell was saying, "That's it, she's here, she's—" And then the most beautiful sound in the world filled the room, a thin, reedy cry that announced the arrival of a very small, very early, very alive baby girl. "She's breathing," Dr. Mitchell said quickly as the NICU team moved in. "Good color, good cry. She needs some help, but she's here and she's fighting." Alara caught only a glimpse, impossibly tiny, covered in vernix, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that worked well enough to scream her displeasure at being born into a cold, bright world weeks before schedule. Then, the NICU team was whisking her away to a warming table, working with efficient speed to assess and stabilize, while Ilara lay there feeling empty and terrified and desperate to know if her baby was going to be okay. "Is she—" her voice cracked. "Is she going to make it?" "She's a fighter," one of the NICU nurses called back. 4 pounds, 3 ounces, small, but good size for 34 weeks. APGAR score of 7. She's doing better than we expected. Dr. Mitchell was still working, delivering the placenta and checking for complications, but Ilara barely felt any of it. All her attention was focused on the warming table where her daughter, was being examined by people who knew how to keep premature babies alive. "Damon," she whispered, Can you see her? Can you tell me if she's okay?" He stood, moved closer to the NICU team, then returned to her side with an expression she couldn't quite read. "She's perfect. Tiny, but perfect. She has your nose." "She needs to go to the NICU," the head neonatologist said, approaching the bed. "Her lungs need support, and we want to monitor her closely, but her prognosis is good. She's strong for her gestational age. We'll get her stabilized, and then you can see her." "How long?" Ilara asked desperately. "A few hours. Maybe less if everything goes smoothly. We'll keep you updated." The doctor hesitated. "You did good, Mom. You gave her a fighting chance." Then they were gone, wheeling the warming bassinet out of the room with her baby inside it, and Ilara was left feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life, despite Damon's presence beside her. "She's so small," Ilara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What if she's not strong enough? What if—" "She's your daughter," Damon interrupted gently. "Which means she's stronger than she looks. Trust that." Dr. Mitchell finished her work and stepped back, pulling off her gloves. "You did beautifully, Ilara. No complications, minimal tearing. You're going to recover just fine. Get some rest. As soon as they give the okay, we'll take you up to see her." But rest was impossible. Ilara lay in the hospital bed, exhausted beyond measure, but unable to close her eyes, her mind consumed with images of her tiny daughter hooked up to machines in the NICU. Every minute that passed without news felt like an hour. Every sound in the hallway made her hope it was someone coming to tell her she could see her baby. Damon stayed beside her, still holding her hand, his presence the only thing keeping her from completely unraveling. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying, for all of it. I don't know how I would have— You would have been fine. You're always fine. You just wouldn't have had someone to share it with." He squeezed her hand gently. "But you don't have to do this alone anymore, Ilara. That's what I've been trying to tell you. I'm not used to that, relying on people. It always ends badly." "Not always. Not this time." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't temporary, that he wouldn't disappear the moment things got hard or complicated or inconvenient. But trust was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use, and relearning it while her premature daughter fought for life in the NICU felt like asking too much of herself. 2 hours later, a NICU nurse appeared in the doorway with a wheelchair. "You ready to meet your baby?" Ilara was out of bed before the nurse finished the question, ignoring the ache in her body and the weakness in her legs. Damon helped her into the wheelchair, then followed as the nurse wheeled her through corridors and elevators to the NICU, a hushed, dimly lit space filled with tiny isolates and the soft beeping of monitors. "She's in isolate 3, the nurse said, guiding them to a clear plastic box where the smallest person Ilara had ever seen lay sleeping. "You can touch her through the portholes, but wash your hands first and be gentle. Her skin is very delicate." Ilara washed her hands with shaking fingers, then reached through the porthole to touch her daughter's impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers were thinner than matchsticks, her chest rising and falling with the assistance of a nasal cannula, her body covered in monitoring wires. But she was alive. She was here. She was real. "Hi, baby girl," Ilara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mom. I'm so sorry you had to come out early. I'm so sorry you're having to fight so hard already. But you're doing so good. You're so strong. And I'm going to be right here, okay? I'm not going anywhere." The baby's tiny fingers curled slightly around Ilara's fingertip, and something in Ilara's chest cracked wide open, not breaking but blooming. This was her daughter, her responsibility. her reason to keep fighting when everything else felt impossible. She needs a name, the nurse said gently, for her bassinet card and records. Alara looked at her daughter, small and fierce, and determined to survive despite impossible odds, and knew exactly what to call her. Ivy, she said. Her name is Ivy. That's beautiful. Strong. She is. Alara couldn't stop looking at her, couldn't stop marveling at the fact that this tiny person had been inside her just hours ago and was now out in the world, breathing air and fighting gravity and existing as her own separate being. She's the strongest person I've ever met. Damon stood beside the wheelchair, looking down at Ivy with an expression Alara couldn't quite interpret. She looks like you, he said quietly. Same determined chin. You think? I know. That's the same expression you had when Marcus Delgado tried to steal my lunch and you decided he wasn't going to get away with it. His smile was soft. Ivy's going to be a force of nature. I can already tell. They stayed in the NICU until the nurses gently suggested Alara needed rest, that she'd just been through major physical trauma and her body needed time to recover. Alara reluctantly let them wheel her back to her room, but only after extracting promises that someone would call her immediately if anything changed with Ivy. Back in her hospital bed, exhaustion finally caught up with her. The adrenaline that had carried her through labor and delivery evaporated, leaving her wrung out and aching and more emotionally raw than she'd ever been. Get some sleep, Damon said, standing to leave. I'll be back in the morning. Wait. Alara caught his hand. Don't go, not yet. He sat back down without argument. I'm here. I'm terrified, she admitted, that something will go wrong, that she won't make it, that I'll fail her before she even has a chance. You're not going to fail her. You're going to love her and protect her and teach her to be as fierce as you are. And when things get hard, because they will get hard, you're going to ask for help instead of trying to carry everything alone. Is that your subtle way of saying I should let you help? It's my direct way of saying you don't have to do this alone unless you want to. I'm here, Alara, for you and for Ivy, however long you need. She searched his face for signs of obligation or pity or anything that would make his presence feel like charity, but all she saw was sincerity. You barely know her. You don't owe her anything. I know her mother. That's enough. He stood again, this time bending to press a light kiss to her forehead, brief, chaste, more comforting than romantic. Sleep. I'll be back before you wake up. Then he was gone, and Alara was alone with her thoughts and her fears and the overwhelming reality that she was someone's mother now. That tiny person in the NICU was depending on her to figure out how to build a life stable enough to raise her in. The responsibility was terrifying. The stakes were impossibly high. And for the first time in months, Alara didn't feel like she was facing it completely alone. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, dreaming of a future where Ivy grew strong and healthy, where fear was something they remembered instead of something they lived with, and where the man who'd once shared her lunch table kept his promise to stay. Alara woke to find Damon asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Gray morning light filtered through the hospital window, painting everything in shades of exhaustion and hope. She watched him for a moment, this man who'd somehow become the only constant in her chaotic world, and felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with recognition. He'd stayed, all night, just like he'd promised. Her movement must have woken him because his eyes opened, instantly alert despite the circumstances. How are you feeling? Sore, worried, like I need to see Ivy. She pushed herself up carefully, wincing at the protest from muscles she'd forgotten she had. Have you heard anything? They called an hour ago. She had a good night. Stable vitals, no complications. The NICU nurse said you can come up whenever you're ready. But relief flooded through her so intensely it left her dizzy. Then let's go, now. You need to eat something first, Damon interrupted gently. And take your pain medication. Dr. Mitchell's orders, not mine. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. He stood, stretching muscles that had clearly spent too long in that chair. 15 minutes. Eat, medicate, then we'll go see Ivy. She's not going anywhere, and you collapsing from low blood sugar won't help anyone. Alara wanted to argue, but the nurse who appeared moments later with breakfast and pills made it clear this wasn't negotiable. She ate mechanically, toast, eggs, juice that tasted like cardboard, while Damon disappeared to get coffee and make phone calls she didn't ask about. 20 minutes later, she was back in the NICU, standing beside Ivy's isolette with her hand through the porthole, marveling at how something so small could already occupy so much space in her heart. The baby's color was better today, her breathing more regular even with the cannula's assistance. She looked less fragile, more determined, like she'd decided surviving was worth the effort. "Good morning, baby girl," Alara whispered. "I'm back, just like I promised. You're doing so good. So good." Ivy's eyes flickered open, dark, unfocused, but definitely seeing something. Alara felt tears sting and didn't bother blinking them away. "She's beautiful," the day nurse said, approaching with a clipboard. "Born fighter, this one. Her oxygen levels have been steadily improving. If she keeps this up, we might be able to remove the cannula in a few days." "Really?" Hope bloomed dangerous and bright in Alara's chest. "Really? Premature babies are unpredictable, but Ivy's showing all the right signs. Strong suck reflex, good muscle tone, responsive to stimuli. She's small, but she's mighty." The nurse smiled. "You should be proud, Mom. You did good." After the nurse left, Damon moved closer to the isolette, studying Ivy with an intensity that made Alara's throat tight. "She has your hands," he said quietly. "Long fingers, artist's hands. I can't draw to save my life. Maybe she'll be better at it than you are." He looked up, meeting Alara's eyes. "Have you thought about what happens after she's discharged? Where you'll go? How you'll manage with a newborn?" The question landed like a weight. Alara had been deliberately not thinking about it, too overwhelmed by the present to face the future. "I don't know. The cottage, I guess. Until I figure something else out. Find a job that offers maternity leave, save up for an apartment, arrange childcare." She stopped, hearing how impossible it all sounded. "I'll figure it out." "You don't have to figure it out alone. Damon, hear me out." He kept his voice low, mindful of the other parents in the NICU. "The cottage is yours for as long as you want it. No time limit, no conditions. When Ivy comes home, you're going to need support, help with night feedings, someone to watch her while you sleep, resources for anything unexpected. I can provide that." "By yourself? You run an empire. You don't have time to play nanny." "I'll hire help, a night nurse for the first few weeks, whatever you need. But Alara, I'm not offering because I think you can't handle it. I'm offering because no one should have to handle a premature newborn alone, and you don't have to." She wanted to refuse, wanted to insist she could manage, that accepting more help would trap her in a debt she could never repay. But looking at Ivy, so small, so fragile, so dependent on things going right when Alara's life had a history of things going catastrophically wrong, she couldn't afford pride over practicality. "Okay," she said quietly, "but only until I get on my feet, until you decide you don't need it anymore," Damon finished, "however long that takes. And Alara, there's something else we need to discuss." The shift in his tone made her stomach tighten. "What?" "Trent Voss?" Damon's expression went cold, controlled. "Vincent's been monitoring him. 2 days ago, he started asking questions about New York. Yesterday, he called in sick to work, and his credit card was used to purchase a bus ticket from Boston to Manhattan." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. "He's coming here?" "He arrived this morning. Vincent tracked him to a motel in Queens. He's looking for you, Alara. Actively. And it's only a matter of time before he finds something, a record, a trail, someone who knows someone." Terror crashed over her in waves. "I need to leave. Take Ivy somewhere else, somewhere he can't—" "No." The word was absolute. "You're not running, not anymore. You don't understand what he's capable of, and he doesn't understand what I'm capable of." Damon's voice was quiet, deadly. "This ends now, today. I'm going to make sure Trent Voss never threatens you again." Alara felt ice flood her veins. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing illegal, nothing that can't be justified. I'm going to have a conversation with him, present evidence I've been gathering, and explain very clearly what happens if he doesn't leave New York immediately and permanently." "Evidence?" "The medical records from when you were treated for injuries he caused. Testimony from your former coworkers about the bruises they saw, the excuses you made. phone records showing the threatening messages, security footage from your old apartment building showing him breaking in after you left. Damon's expression was carved from stone. I have enough to bury him legally, Ilara. Restraining orders, assault charges, stalking charges, all documented, all prosecutable. What I don't have is your permission to use it. She stared at him, processing the implications. You've been building a case against him? Since the day you told me his name. I wasn't going to use it unless necessary, but now it's necessary. He came to New York. He's hunting you while you're recovering from childbirth and your daughter's in the NICU. That crosses every line. He paused. But I need your consent. This is your life, your trauma, your choice about how to handle it. I won't do anything without your permission. Ilara looked down at Ivy, sleeping peacefully in her isolette, unaware that the man who terrorized her mother for years was less than 10 miles away. The thought of Trent finding them, of him seeing Ivy, of him having any claim or connection to this innocent life, made her want to burn the world down. Do it, she said. Whatever you need to do to make him go away, do it. Are you sure? I'm sure. She met Damon's eyes. I'm done being afraid. I'm done running. Ivy deserves better than a mother who spends her whole life looking over her shoulder. Damon nodded once, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Vincent, set it up, today. I want witnesses, recording equipment, and our lawyer present. Make it clear this is his one chance to walk away before we involve law enforcement. He paused, listening. Yes, all of it. And Vincent? Make sure he understands that if he ever comes near Ilara or her daughter again, legal consequences will be the least of his problems. He disconnected and turned back to Ilara. It's done. Vincent will handle the meeting. Our lawyer will present the evidence and the terms. Trent can either sign a legally binding agreement to stay away from you, backed by the threat of immediate prosecution if he violates it, or he can refuse and we file charges today. What if he refuses? What if he fights? Then we bury him. Damon's voice held no doubt, no hesitation. I have resources he can't match, lawyers he can't afford, and evidence he can't refute. If he wants a war, he'll lose, badly. Ilara felt something unknot in her chest. Not quite relief, not quite victory, but something close. For the first time since she'd met Trent, she wasn't the one with fewer options. She wasn't the one backed into a corner. She had someone with power and resources on her side, and that changed everything. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over until he's gone. Damon checked his watch. I need to go oversee this. Will you be okay here? I have Ivy. I'll be fine. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, then just nodded and left. Ilara watched him go, then turned back to her daughter, who'd started making small fussing sounds that the nurse had said meant she was getting ready to wake up. Your mom's got some powerful friends, baby girl, Ilara murmured, stroking Ivy's tiny hand through the porthole, and she's finally learning to use them. We're going to be okay, I promise you that. We're going to be okay. The hours that followed were a strange mixture of normalcy and anxiety. Ilara spent them in the NICU, learning to change Ivy's diaper through the isolette portholes, watching the nurses check vitals and adjust monitors, pumping breast milk that would be fed to Ivy through a feeding tube until she was strong enough to nurse. The routines were comforting, giving her something concrete to focus on instead of imagining what was happening between Damon and Trent. It was late afternoon when Damon finally returned, looking like he'd just won a war without firing a shot. It's done, he said simply. Ilara's hand stilled on the breast pump. What happened? Trent Voss signed a legally binding agreement never to contact you, search for you, or come within 500 feet of you or Ivy. He also signed paperwork acknowledging paternity fraud, stating clearly that he has no biological or legal claim to your daughter and will never pursue one. He agreed to all that? Once he saw the evidence, he didn't have much choice. The assault documentation alone could send him to prison. The stalking charges would guarantee it. His lawyer, a public defender who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, advised him to sign. Damon's smile was cold. So he did. In front of witnesses with video documentation, fully notarized. If he violates any part of that agreement, he goes to jail. No warnings, no second chances. Jail. Ilara felt lightheaded. He's really gone? He's on a bus back to Boston right now. Vincent made sure he got on it. And we have people monitoring his movements for the next few months just to be certain. But yes, Alara, he's gone. For good. She couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. For months, years, she'd lived with the certainty that Trent would find her, hurt her, take everything she'd built and destroy it. That fear had shaped every decision, every plan, every moment. And now it was just over, finished, done. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. You don't have to say anything. Damon moved closer, his expression softening. You're safe now. Ivy's safe. That's all that matters. How do I repay this? How do I even begin to... By living well, by raising your daughter without fear, by becoming the person you were before he tried to break you. He paused. That's all the payment I need, Alara. Seeing you free. She stood, crossed the space between them, and hugged him with enough force to make him stumble back a step. This time, it wasn't awkward or brief. This time, she let herself hold on, let herself draw strength from someone who'd earned the right to be trusted, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was actually behind her. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder, for everything, for seeing me, for staying, for fighting battles I couldn't fight alone. Damon's arms came around her carefully, like she was something precious he didn't want to break. You were never alone, Alara. You just didn't know it yet. They stood like that until a nurse politely cleared her throat, reminding them they were in the NICU and there were protocols about physical contact. They separated, both slightly embarrassed, but something had shifted between them, something that acknowledged they were more than old friends, more than protector and protected, something that neither of them was quite ready to name, but both could feel. Over the next week, Ivy continued to improve with the stubborn determination Alara was beginning to recognize as her daughter's defining characteristic. The oxygen cannula came off on day 5. Bottle feeding started on day 7. By day 10, the neonatologist was talking about discharge plans if Ivy maintained her weight gain and showed no setbacks. Alara spent every possible moment in the NICU learning everything she could about caring for a premature infant, how to support Ivy's head when she was still building neck strength, how to watch for signs of respiratory distress, how to manage feeding schedules that required waking a sleeping baby every 3 hours. The nurses became her teachers, her support system, her proof that not everyone in the world was out to hurt her. Damon visited daily, usually in the evenings after whatever business he conducted during the day. He never stayed long, 20 minutes, maybe 30, but his presence became something Alara looked forward to. He brought her decent coffee from a shop near the hospital, asked questions about Ivy's progress that showed he was actually listening, and told her stories about the estate renovations he was planning for the cottage's nursery. I didn't ask you to do that, Alara protested when he mentioned the crib he'd ordered. You didn't ask me not to either. He studied Ivy through the isolette glass. She's going to need somewhere to sleep when she comes home. Figured I'd save you the trouble of shopping while you're recovering. A crib, fine. But you mentioned a changing table, and a rocking chair, and a baby monitor, blackout curtains, and a white noise machine. All things you'll need. He looked at her, expression mild. Are you actually upset about this? Or are you upset because accepting help still feels wrong? Alara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. The second one. Thought so. Work on that. But his smile took the edge off the command. On Ivy's 12th day of life, Dr. Richardson, the lead neonatologist, pulled Alara aside with news that made her heart stop and restart. Ivy's doing remarkably well, Dr. Richardson said. Her weight is up to 4 pounds, 9 ounces. She's maintaining her body temperature in an open crib. She's taking full bottles without oxygen support. All her tests are coming back normal. He paused. I think she's ready to go home. Home? Alara repeated stupidly. Really? She's ready? As ready as she's going to be. She's still small, still needs careful monitoring, but there's nothing we're doing here that can't be done at home with proper education and follow-up care. You've been learning everything we can teach you, and frankly, babies do better in home environments than hospitals once they're stable enough. When? Tomorrow, if you're ready. We'll do a final check in the morning, make sure all her tests are clear, and if everything looks good, you can take her home by afternoon. Alara called Damon before she'd even left the NICU, her hands shaking with excitement and terror. Ivy's coming home. Tomorrow. They're discharging her tomorrow. That's incredible. She could hear the smile in his voice. Are you ready? I have no idea, yes? No? Maybe? I don't know what I'm doing, Damon. What if I mess this up? What if something goes wrong and I don't know how to fix it? Then you call the doctor, or the NICU hotline they're definitely going to give you, or me. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out. He paused. The nursery's ready. I had Mrs. Chen stock it with everything the hospital recommended. Diapers, wipes, bottles, formula as backup, even though you're nursing. You have everything you need, Alara. All you have to do is bring Ivy home. Home. The word settled over her like a blessing. After months of running, hiding, surviving in temporary spaces that never felt safe, she finally had somewhere that qualified as home. It was borrowed, sure. Temporary, probably. But it was real, and it was waiting. Okay, she said, steadier now. Okay, we can do this. Yes, Damon agreed, but you can. The next day, Alara dressed Ivy in a going-home outfit that was still too big despite being labeled preemie size. A soft pink onesie with tiny flowers that made her daughter look even more impossibly small. The car seat installation had been checked by 3 different nurses, all of whom assured Alara it was properly secured. The discharge papers were signed, the follow-up appointments were scheduled. There was nothing left to do except actually leave. You've got this, the day nurse said, helping Alara settle Ivy into the car seat. She's strong, you're prepared, and you have our number if you need anything. Trust yourself, Alara. You know more than you think you do. Alara nodded, not trusting herself to speak past the emotion lodging in her throat. She'd been in this NICU for 12 days. 12 days of monitors and isolates and medical professionals who knew exactly what to do. Walking out those doors with full responsibility for keeping Ivy alive felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if she could fly. Vincent drove them back to the estate with the careful precision of someone transporting nitroglycerin. Alara sat in the back seat beside Ivy's car seat, unable to stop watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, convinced that the moment she looked away, something would go wrong. When they pulled up to the cottage, Damon was waiting on the porch. He helped Alara out of the car, then carefully lifted the car seat, Ivy still sleeping peacefully inside, and carried it into the cottage. The nursery that had been empty when Alara left was now fully equipped. Pale yellow walls, a white crib with soft bedding, a changing table stocked with supplies, a rocking chair positioned near the window where morning light would stream in. It's perfect, Alara whispered, taking in the space Damon had created for her daughter. It's functional, he corrected, but she could hear the pleasure in his voice. Everything else, decoration, personalization, that's up to you. This is just the foundation. They transferred Ivy from car seat to crib, both of them holding their breath until she settled without waking. Then they stood there, 2 people who'd survived impossible childhoods watching a baby who'd survived an impossible start. And Alara felt something click into place that had been broken for years. I'm terrified, she admitted quietly. I know. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not enough? Damon turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Then you ask for help. You call the doctor. You wake me up at 3 a.m. if you need to. You do whatever it takes to keep her safe and healthy. But Alara, he waited until she met his eyes. You are enough. You've always been enough. You just forgot for a while. How do you know? Because the girl who protected me when we were kids grew into a woman who ran from an abuser, survived alone while pregnant, found work even when the world made it impossible, and just brought her premature daughter home from the NICU. That's not someone who isn't enough. That's someone who's stronger than she knows. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to list all the ways she'd failed and fallen short and barely scraped by. But looking at Ivy, her daughter, sleeping peacefully in a safe room in a protected home, the evidence against self-doubt was overwhelming. Stay for dinner? She asked impulsively. Mrs. Chen sent enough food for an army, and I don't want to eat alone on Ivy's first night home. Damon hesitated, and Alara saw him weighing boundaries against loneliness, propriety against connection. Are you sure? I'm sure. Please. Okay, but only if you let me cook. You just pushed a human out of your body less than 2 weeks ago. Sit down and let someone take care of you for once. So Alara sat at the cottage's small kitchen table while Damon moved around the space with surprising competence, heating the lasagna Mrs. Chen had prepared and assembling a salad from fresh vegetables. They ate in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Ivy's small sounds from the nursery that sent Alara's heart racing until she confirmed her daughter was just shifting in sleep, not dying. "She's fine," Damon said gently after the third time Alara jumped up to check. "Babies make noise. It doesn't always mean crisis." "How do you know?" "I was a foster kid, remember? Spent time in homes with babies. You learn to tell the difference between fussing and actual distress pretty quickly. Teach me." So he did, explaining the nuances of newborn sounds while they finished dinner and moved to the living room where they could hear Ivy better. Hours passed without either of them noticing, conversation flowing between childhood memories and present observations, until Damon glanced at his watch and swore softly. "It's past midnight. I should go." Alara didn't want him to leave, didn't want to face the long night alone with all its potential disasters and her inexperience. But she also couldn't ask him to stay, couldn't blur the lines between gratitude and something else when she wasn't sure what that something else might be. "Thank you," she said instead. "For dinner, for everything, for making today less terrifying than it could have been." "Any time." He stood, hesitated, then bent to kiss her forehead, brief, gentle, the same gesture he'd given her in the hospital. "Call if you need anything. I mean that, Alara. 3 a.m, doesn't matter. You need help, you call." "I will." But after he left, when Ivy woke screaming at 2 a.m. and Alara couldn't figure out if she was hungry or uncomfortable or sick, she tried everything herself first, feeding, changing, rocking, singing, before finally, desperately, calling the number Damon had made her save in her phone. He answered on the first ring, voice alert despite the hour. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. She won't stop crying and I've tried everything and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm coming. Keep her safe. Keep yourself calm. I'll be there in 5 minutes." He was there in 3, still in sweatpants and a t-shirt that suggested he'd been sleeping, his hair disheveled and his expression concerned. He took one look at Ivy, red-faced and screaming in Alara's arms, and gently took the baby, checking her diaper, her temperature, the way she was positioned. "She has gas," he said after a moment. "See how her legs are pulling up? That's trapped air. She needs to be burped better after feeds." He demonstrated the technique, firm pats on Ivy's back while supporting her in different positions, until finally the baby released a burp that seemed impossibly loud for something so small, then immediately settled into whimpering instead of screaming. "How did you know that?" Alara asked, exhausted and grateful. "Trial and error in foster homes. Sometimes you learn by necessity." He handed Ivy back carefully. "She's fine, Alara. You're fine. First nights home are always rough. You're both figuring each other out. Will you stay?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Just tonight. Just until I know I can handle this. I have a spare bedroom. You don't have to—" "I'll stay," he interrupted gently. "As long as you need." So Damon stayed, sleeping in the cottage's spare room, waking every time Ivy cried to check that Alara had it handled before going back to bed. His presence made the impossible night manageable, transformed fear into simple exhaustion, reminded Alara that she didn't have to be perfect as long as she was willing to ask for help. By morning, when pale sunlight filtered through the nursery windows and Ivy nursed peacefully in Alara's arms, something had fundamentally shifted. Alara looked at her daughter, healthy, safe, home, and then at Damon standing in the doorway with coffee and concern, and realized she'd finally stopped running. This was home. This was safety. This was what it felt like to trust someone with the fragile, broken pieces of yourself and have them handle those pieces with care. And for the first time in years, Alara wasn't afraid of what came next. 3 months after bringing Ivy home, Alara stood in the cottage nursery at dawn, watching her daughter sleep in the soft morning light, and realized she'd forgotten what constant fear felt like. The change had been so gradual, she'd almost missed it. The way her shoulders no longer tensed at unexpected sounds, how she could sleep through the night without nightmares when Ivy allowed it, the absence of that perpetual knot in her stomach that had lived there for years. She was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Ivy had grown from 4 pounds of fragility into a chunky 7-pound force of nature who had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about expressing them. Her dark hair had come in thick and wild, her eyes had settled into warm brown flecked with gold, and her personality was emerging as stubbornly determined, a trait Alara recognized from looking in the mirror. "You are exactly like your mother," Damon had said last week when Ivy refused to sleep until she was positioned exactly how she wanted. Stubborn, particular, and completely convinced the world should bend to your preferences. "Are you calling me difficult?" Alara had asked, amused. "I'm calling you both forces of nature. There's a difference." The dynamic between them had shifted over those 3 months into something Alara still didn't have words for. Damon came by the cottage almost daily, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to hold Ivy while Alara showered or napped or remembered what it felt like to be something other than a mother for 20 minutes. He never pushed for more than she offered, never made her feel obligated, never crossed lines she hadn't explicitly invited him to cross. But the lines were blurring anyway. In the way her heart lifted when she heard his car in the drive, in how naturally he fit into their evening routine, reading to Ivy from picture books she was too young to understand while Alara prepared bottles for night feedings, in the comfortable silences that felt more intimate than conversation, the casual touches that lingered slightly too long, the way they'd both started saying "we" when talking about Ivy's future instead of "I." Alara knew she was falling for him, had probably been falling since that first night in the hospital when he'd stayed through her labor, held her hand through impossible pain, and promised he wasn't going anywhere. The realization didn't scare her the way it should have. With Damon, everything felt inevitable, like they'd been heading toward this since she'd shared her sandwich with a terrified foster kid 20 years ago and set in motion a chain of events that would bring them both here. But acknowledging feelings and acting on them were different things, and Alara had been carefully avoiding the latter. She had too much to figure out first: her career, her independence, what kind of life she wanted to build for Ivy. She couldn't let herself get distracted by romance when survival was still her primary job. Except survival wasn't her primary job anymore. For the first time in years, she had space to think beyond the next crisis, room to plan instead of just react, freedom to want things that weren't strictly necessary. She was considering this, turning the idea over in her mind like a puzzle piece she wasn't sure where to place, when her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Mitchell's office, reminding her about Ivy's 3-month checkup that afternoon. The appointment went perfectly. Ivy had gained weight appropriately, hit all her developmental milestones, and charmed everyone in the pediatric office with her fierce personality and impressive lung capacity when she disagreed with the vaccination schedule. "She's doing beautifully, Osh," Dr. Mitchell said, completing the examination. "No lingering effects from the premature birth that I can see. She's caught up to where a full-term 3-month-old should be, which is remarkable. You're doing everything right, Alara." The words landed with unexpected weight. Alara had spent 3 months second-guessing every decision, certain she was somehow failing despite all evidence to the contrary. Hearing professional confirmation that Ivy was thriving felt like permission to finally believe it. "Thank you," she managed, past the emotion clogging her throat. "How are you doing?" Dr. Mitchell asked, her tone shifting to something more personal. "Physically, emotionally, all of it?" "Better. Good, actually. I started physical therapy for the separation I had during delivery, and it's helping. I'm sleeping when Ivy sleeps, eating regularly. The postpartum depression screening you did last month came back clear." "And emotionally? The trauma you experienced before Ivy was born, how are you processing that?" Alara considered the question honestly. "I don't know if I've fully processed it yet. Some days I'm fine. Some days I see someone who looks like Trent from behind, and I panic before remembering he can't hurt me anymore. But the panic passes faster now, and it's getting easier to believe I'm actually safe. That's normal. Healing isn't linear, and trauma leaves marks that take time to fade, but the fact that you're aware of your triggers and working through them is important." Dr. Mitchell paused. "Have you thought about therapy? Professional support beyond just medical care?" "I've thought about it. Haven't acted on it yet." "I'd encourage you to consider it, not because you're not coping well, you clearly are, but because having someone trained in trauma recovery could help you process what you've been through in ways that prevent it from affecting Ivy as she grows up." The observation hit home. Alara didn't want her daughter growing up in the shadow of her mother's trauma, didn't want Ivy to inherit fears that belonged to a different time, a different version of Alara who no longer existed. She wanted Ivy to know safety as her baseline, to understand that the world could be kind, to never question whether she deserved protection and love. I'll look into it, Ilara said, meaning it. That evening, after Ivy was fed and bathed and sleeping in her crib, Ilara opened the laptop Damon had given her and started researching therapists who specialized in domestic violence recovery and single mothers. The resources Damon had compiled months ago included a list of recommended professionals, all vetted, all experienced, all accepting new patients. She was still scrolling through profiles when Damon knocked on the cottage door, carrying takeout from the Thai place Ilara had mentioned craving last week. You remembered, she said, accepting the bags with a smile that felt dangerously close to something more than friendly. You said you'd been thinking about their pad thai for days. Figured I'd save you the trouble of ordering. He followed her into the kitchen, falling into the comfortable rhythm they'd developed over months of shared meals. How was Ivy's appointment? Perfect. Dr. Mitchell says she's thriving. No developmental concerns, healthy weight gain, all the things I've been worried about are apparently nothing to worry about. Ilara plated the food while Damon pulled drinks from the refrigerator without asking where anything was kept. He knew, had learned the cottage's geography through repetition and presence. She also suggested I consider therapy. For Ivy? For me. To process everything that happened with Trent, make sure I'm not carrying trauma that could affect how I parent. Damon was quiet for a moment, considering. That's smart. Are you going to do it? I think so. I was looking at therapists when you arrived. There's one who specializes in exactly what I need, and she has evening hours, so I could schedule around Ivy's sleep schedule. Do you need help with childcare during appointments? I can probably bring her. Ilara. He waited until she looked at him. Let me help. You can't process trauma effectively if you're worried about keeping a baby quiet in a waiting room. I'll watch Ivy during your sessions. Or we'll hire someone if you're not comfortable with that. But don't compromise your healing because you're trying to do everything yourself. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could manage. But the truth was that therapy would be hard enough without adding logistics to the challenge. And she trusted Damon with Ivy, had trusted him for months now, watched him handle her daughter with a gentleness that made Ilara's chest ache. Okay, she agreed. If you're sure you don't mind. I've never minded anything involving you or Ivy, you know that. The words hung between them, weighted with implication neither of them quite addressed. They ate in comfortable silence, then moved to the living room where Damon had gotten into the habit of staying until Ivy's late evening feeding, talking about everything and nothing while the cottage settled into nighttime quiet around them. I've been thinking about going back to work, Ilara said during a lull in conversation. Not immediately. Ivy's still too young, but maybe in another few months. I miss nursing. I miss feeling useful beyond just being a mother. You're allowed to want both, Damon said. Being a good mother doesn't mean sacrificing everything else you are. I know, intellectually, but the guilt is still there. Like if I'm not with her every single moment, I'm failing somehow. You're not failing. You're modeling what it looks like to have a full life, career, purpose, identity beyond just parenthood. Ivy will benefit from having a mother who's fulfilled, not one who's slowly losing herself to martyrdom. Ilara looked at him, this man who somehow always knew exactly what she needed to hear. How did you get so wise? Therapy, he said with a slight smile. Years of it. After my foster parents died, I spent a long time angry and self-destructive. Eventually, someone convinced me to talk to a professional. Best decision I ever made. You never mentioned that. You never asked, and honestly, it's not something I advertise. But yeah, I spent my 20s working through abandonment issues and learning that accepting help wasn't weakness. Still working through some of it, if I'm honest. The vulnerability in his admission made something shift in Ilara's chest. She'd spent so long thinking of Damon as unshakable, powerful, controlled, immune to the fears that plagued normal people. Knowing he'd struggled, that he'd needed help and sought it, made him more human, more reachable. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. Thank you for listening. Ivy's cry interrupted whatever might have happened next, probably for the best, Ilara thought as she went to prepare a bottle. The tension between them was building towards something inevitable, but she wasn't ready to name it yet, wasn't sure she could handle the vulnerability of admitting how much she'd come to need him. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Ilara started therapy, meeting with Dr. Sarah Chen every Tuesday evening while Damon watched Ivy at the cottage. The sessions were hard, excavating trauma she'd buried, examining patterns she'd rather ignore, learning to separate her past from her present. But they were also healing, giving her tools to process what had happened instead of just surviving it. She started studying for her nursing license reinstatement, working through textbooks during Ivy's naps, taking practice tests late at night when the cottage was quiet. Damon connected her with a hospital administrator who explained the reinstatement process and agreed to serve as a professional reference when the time came. Not a favor, he insisted, just recognition of her qualifications. Ivy continued to thrive, hitting milestones early and often, her personality emerging as fearless and determined. She started smiling at 6 weeks, laughing at 10, reaching for objects and rolling over and generally proving that premature birth was just another obstacle she'd decided to overcome. And through it all, Damon remained constant, not overwhelming, not possessive, just present in ways that made Alara realize what partnership could look like when built on respect instead of control. It was during Ivy's 4th month that everything finally came to a head. Alara was in the cottage kitchen making coffee when Vincent appeared at the door with an expression that made her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong, but there's something you need to know." Vincent stepped inside, his usual professional demeanor giving way to something more human. Trent Voss was arrested this morning in Boston. Assault charges. He violated a protective order his new girlfriend filed after he put her in the hospital. The news hit Alara like a physical blow. Not grief or fear, but rage. Rage that Trent had found another victim, another woman to terrorize, another life to destroy. Rage that the pattern continued despite everything, that he'd learned nothing, changed nothing. "Is she okay?" Alara heard herself ask. "She will be." She pressed charges this time, didn't back down when his lawyer tried to intimidate her. "The DA is taking it seriously, especially given the documentation we provided showing his prior behavior with you. They're building a pattern case. They want me to testify." It wasn't a question. Vincent nodded. "The DA's office will reach out formally, but yes, your testimony, combined with the medical records and the agreement he signed, would strengthen their case significantly. But Alara," he paused, "you don't have to. No one would blame you for protecting yourself and moving on." "What does Damon think?" "He thinks you should do whatever feels right for you. He also thinks Trent deserves to face consequences for what he's done, but not at the cost of your peace." Alara poured her coffee with shaking hands, processing the implications. Testifying meant reliving trauma she'd been working hard to move past. It meant facing Trent in a courtroom, letting him see that she'd survived, giving him one more chance to try to intimidate her. But it also meant preventing him from doing this to someone else. Meant using her voice to protect women who might not have the resources or support system she'd found. Meant transforming her survival into purpose. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll testify. He doesn't get to keep doing this to people." Vincent nodded with something that looked like respect. "I'll let the DA know. They'll coordinate timing so you don't have to travel until Ivy's older, probably 6 to 8 months from now." After Vincent left, Alara called Damon immediately. He arrived within 20 minutes, finding her pacing the cottage living room with Ivy asleep in the baby carrier against her chest. "Vincent told you?" she asked. "He did. Are you okay?" "I don't know. I'm angry. I'm scared. I'm relieved that she pressed charges and furious that she had to. I'm proud of myself for agreeing to testify and terrified about what it will cost me." She stopped pacing, meeting his eyes. "Tell me I'm doing the right thing." "You're doing the brave thing. Whether it's right is something only you can decide." "That's not helpful." "No, but it's honest." Damon crossed to her, careful not to disturb Ivy, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Testifying will be hard. It will dredge up everything you've been working to process, but it will also give you agency, the chance to speak your truth in a way that has legal consequences, to be the reason he finally faces accountability. Only you can weigh whether that's worth the cost." Alara closed her eyes, leaning into his solid presence. "I want him to pay for what he's done. To me, to her, to everyone he's hurt. I want him to understand that women aren't disposable, that violence has consequences, that he can't just keep destroying lives without answering for it. Then testify. And I'll be there with you. In the courtroom if they allow it, outside waiting if they don't. You won't face this alone." Promise? Promise. She believed him. That was the remarkable thing. After years of broken promises and men who disappeared when things got hard, she actually believed Damon would keep his word. The months between the decision and the trial passed in a blur of preparation. The DA's office coached Alara on what to expect, how to handle cross-examination, what details were relevant versus what was trauma oversharing. Her therapist helped her build coping mechanisms for the emotional aftermath, and Damon simply stayed steady, the gravitational center that kept her grounded when preparation threatened to overwhelm her. Ivy turned 6 months old, then 7, growing from an infant into a baby with opinions and preferences and a smile that could light up entire rooms. She started sitting up unassisted, reaching for everything within grasp, babbling in sounds that Alara swore were almost words. Watching her daughter thrive gave Alara strength for what was coming. This was why she was testifying, to create a world where Ivy never had to fear men like Trent. The trial was scheduled for late November, 11 months after Ivy's birth. Alara flew to Boston with Ivy and Damon, who'd arranged for a nanny to watch the baby during court hours. The night before her testimony, Alara couldn't sleep, anxiety and anger warring in her chest while she mentally rehearsed everything she needed to say. Damon found her on the hotel room balcony at 2 a.m., staring out at the city lights. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Can't stop thinking about tomorrow. What if I freeze? What if I can't get the words out? What if his lawyer makes me look like I'm lying?" Then you pause, breathe, and try again. The truth doesn't change just because someone challenges it. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Alara, you've survived everything he threw at you. You escaped, rebuilt your life, brought a premature baby through the NICU, and created a future he tried to steal. You're not the same woman he terrorized. Remember that. I'm terrified he'll look at me and I'll feel small again, powerless. He can't make you powerless unless you let him, and you're not going to let him." Damon turned to face her fully. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever known. You've been strong since you were 9 years old and decided a kid you barely knew deserved protection. That strength didn't disappear just because someone tried to beat it out of you. It's still there. Tomorrow, you get to show him that." Alara felt tears sting her eyes. "How do you always know what to say?" "Because I know you, the real you, not the version trauma created. And she's fierce." Before she could second-guess herself, Alara closed the distance between them and kissed him. Not gentle or tentative, but with all the fear and gratitude and longing she'd been holding back for months. Damon went still for just a second before kissing her back with equal intensity, his arms coming around her like he'd been waiting for this, like he'd been holding back the same tide of feelings that had been building between them since that first night he'd found her scrubbing floors at 2 a.m. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alara pressed her forehead against his. "I should have done that months ago," she whispered. "You did it when you were ready. That's all that matters." His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I love you, Alara. I've probably loved you since 6th grade, if I'm honest. But I'll wait as long as you need for you to be sure." "I'm sure." The certainty settled over her like truth. "I love you too. I'm terrified of it. I don't know how to do this without messing it up. But I love you." "Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations, just—" He kissed her again, softer this time. "Just this." They went back inside, Alara falling asleep in Damon's arms for the first time, her fear about tomorrow softened by the knowledge that whatever happened, she wouldn't face it alone. The next morning, Alara walked into that Boston courtroom wearing a professional dress Damon had helped her pick out, her head high despite the nausea churning in her stomach. She didn't look at Trent when she took the stand, refused to give him the satisfaction of her fear. Instead, she focused on the prosecutor, the jury, the court reporter documenting everything. And then she told her story, all of it, the escalating control, the first time he'd hit her, the pregnancy that had made everything worse, the escape that had saved her life. She described the bruises, the fear, the way he'd tracked her down despite her precautions. She detailed the agreement Damon had forced him to sign and how he'd violated its spirit by doing to another woman exactly what he'd done to her. Trent's lawyer tried to shake her testimony, suggested she was exaggerating, that she'd left willingly, that she was making herself out to be a victim for attention. But Alara had spent months in therapy learning to trust her truth, and she didn't waver. I'm not exaggerating, she said clearly. I'm finally telling the truth I was too afraid to tell while he could still hurt me. And I'm here to make sure he can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt me and the woman he put in the hospital. When she stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later, exhausted and emotionally raw, she finally looked at Trent. He looked smaller than she remembered, not physically, but in presence. The man who'd occupied so much space in her nightmares seemed ordinary in the courtroom, stripped of the power she'd given him through fear. He couldn't hurt her anymore. That realization settled into her bones like bedrock. Damon was waiting outside the courtroom, and Alara walked straight into his arms. "You were incredible," he said against her hair. "So strong, so clear. They believed every word. I told the truth. That's all I could do. It was enough. More than enough." 3 days later, the jury came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Trent Voss was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with additional penalties that would follow him for life. Restraining orders, mandatory treatment programs, a record that would prevent him from hiding his violence from future partners. Alara stood in the courtroom and watched him be led away in handcuffs, and felt something release in her chest that had been locked tight for years. It was over. Really, truly over. He would serve his time, she would rebuild her life, and Ivy would grow up never knowing the fear that had shaped her mother's existence for too long. That night, back in New York with Ivy sleeping peacefully in her crib, Alara sat with Damon in the cottage living room and finally let herself cry, not from sadness or fear, but from relief so profound it felt physical. "It's really done," she said through tears. "He can't come after me. He can't hurt anyone for at least 5 years. It's actually done." "It's done," Damon confirmed, holding her close. "You did that, Alara. You stood up, told your truth, and made sure he faced consequences. You protected yourself and every woman who might have crossed his path. That's not nothing. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you think. I just made it easier." She pulled back to look at him. This man who'd seen her at her worst and stayed anyway, who'd protected her without controlling her, who'd given her space to heal while making sure she knew she wasn't alone. "What happens now?" she asked. "With us, with all of this?" "Whatever you want to happen. We can keep things as they are. We can take it slow. We can—" "I want to move forward," Alara interrupted. "I want to build something real with you. Not because I need rescuing or because I owe you, but because I love you, and I want to see what we could be together." "I want that too." His smile was soft, genuine. "But Alara, I need you to know, you don't owe me anything. Not for the cottage, not for helping with Ivy, not for dealing with Trent. I did those things because I care about you, not because I expected anything in return. I know. That's why I trust you. That's why this works." She kissed him gently. "I'm not ready to rush into anything. I still need time, space, therapy to process everything, but I want you in my life, in our lives, as more than just a friend." "Then that's what we'll be. We'll figure out the details as we go." Over the following months, they did exactly that. Damon and Alara navigated the complexity of building a relationship while co-parenting a baby who wasn't biologically his but who'd completely stolen his heart. They had dinner together most nights, started calling each other partner instead of friend, made space in each other's lives without rushing toward labels or timelines. Alara passed her nursing boards in February and started interviewing for positions at hospitals within commuting distance. She found a job at a pediatric clinic that offered flexible hours and the chance to work with children, exactly what she'd hoped for. The cottage remained home, but she started saving money for eventual independence, building toward a future where she stayed by choice rather than necessity. Ivy grew into a toddler who adored both her mother and the man she'd started calling Day, because Damon was too many syllables. She took her first steps at 11 months, said her first word at 13 months, naturally, it was no, and developed a personality that was equal parts fierce independence and confident affection. When Ivy turned 1 year old, Alara threw a small party at the cottage with just Mrs. Chen, Vincent, Dr. Mitchell, and a few other people who'd become family through proximity and care. Watching Ivy dig into her first birthday cake with gleeful abandon, surrounded by people who loved her, Alara felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for years. This was what safety looked like, what love looked like, what home felt like when you finally stopped running and let yourself stay. Later that evening, after Ivy was asleep and the guests had left, Alara and Damon sat on the cottage porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you," Alara said quietly, "for all of it. For seeing me when I was invisible. For staying when I was impossible. For loving Ivy like she's yours." "She is mine," Damon said simply. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. I love her. I love you. That's not going to change." "I love you too. Both of you." Laura leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content in a way she'd never thought possible. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong, for this to fall apart. But it doesn't. You're just here, steady, real." "I'm here," he confirmed, "for as long as you'll have me. That might be a very long time." "Good." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd survived impossible childhoods and built something better from the wreckage. Inside, Ivy slept peacefully, safe and loved, and completely unaware that her existence had rewritten her mother's entire story from tragedy to triumph. 6 months later, Alara bought her first apartment, small, affordable, hers. She furnished it carefully, moved in gradually, created space that belonged only to her and Ivy. But most nights, they ended up back at the cottage, where Damon would cook dinner and Ivy would demand stories, and the three of them would fall into rhythms that felt remarkably like family. When Damon proposed, 2 years after Alara had first walked into his estate as a terrified pregnant maid, it was simple. No grand gesture, no pressure, just a quiet question on an ordinary Tuesday while they were doing dishes after dinner. "Marry me," he said, "not because you need me or owe me, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you officially. Because Ivy deserves to have her family formalized. Because I can't imagine my future without both of you in it." Alara looked at him, this man who'd kept every promise, who'd loved her through healing, who'd shown her what partnership looked like when built on respect instead of fear, and knew her answer without hesitation. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the estate, with Ivy as flower girl and Vincent as best man, and Mrs. Chen crying happy tears in the front row. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Alara had imagined as a girl. It was better. Harder won. More real. Built on foundations of trust and survival, and the kind of love that grew from seeing someone at their worst and choosing them anyway. Damon transformed his business over the following years, using the resources he'd built through morally gray means to create legitimate opportunities, foundations that helped women escape domestic violence, housing programs for single mothers, scholarships for foster kids who needed the chances he'd fought for. Alara returned to nursing full-time, specializing in trauma-informed pediatric care, using her own history to connect with patients who needed someone to see their fear and validate it. Ivy grew up fierce and fearless, surrounded by love that taught her she was valuable beyond measure, that asking for help was strength, that the world held both darkness and light, and she had the power to choose which one she amplified. And Alara, the girl who'd shared her sandwich with a terrified foster kid, the woman who'd scrubbed floors at 2 a.m. while pregnant and hiding, the mother who'd fought her way back from rock bottom, finally stopped waiting for catastrophe. She'd learned that safety wasn't something someone else gave you. It was something you built, piece by piece, day by day, choice by choice. It was boundaries respected and promises kept. It was waking up beside someone who chose you every morning. It was raising a daughter who would never have to learn the lessons trauma had taught too early. 5 years after that first night in the cottage, Alara stood in the nursery of their shared home, no longer borrowed, no longer temporary, and watched Damon read bedtime stories to Ivy and her baby brother, a boy they'd welcomed the previous spring. The scene was so achingly normal, so beautifully ordinary, that tears pricked her eyes. "You okay?" Damon asked, noticing her expression. "I'm perfect," she said, and meant it with everything she had. "We're perfect." And they were. Not because life was easy or pain-free or without challenges, but because they'd learned to face those challenges together, to carry weight that was too heavy for one person to bear alone, to trust that love could be gentle instead of violent, steady instead of volatile, healing instead of breaking. The frightened maid scrubbing floors in the darkness was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd reclaimed her power, rebuilt her life, and learned that sometimes the people you saved when you were young turned out to be exactly the people who'd save you back when you needed it most. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could be honored. They could be transformed. They could become the foundation for something neither person expected, but both desperately needed. A partnership built on seeing each other, staying despite difficulty, and choosing love even when fear whispered that hope was dangerous. Alara had spent years running from a man who wanted to destroy her. She'd found safety with a man who wanted to protect her. And eventually she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that the strongest protection came not from someone else's power, but from her own resilience, her own voice, her own refusal to let trauma define her future. She was safe. Ivy was safe. They were home. And that was worth more than any fairy tale ending could ever be.